It's fair to say tonight that Chile's national capital, Santiago, the city which has been home to me for several years now, is up in flames. Chile faces its greatest political and social crisis since the departure of Augusto Pinochet's civil-military dictatorship back in 1990. As I record this report in the late hours of this Sunday evening, Santiago, the city that will host none other than the APEC Economic Leaders meeting in exactly 1 month's time, is in tatters after days of non-stop widespread protests which have now spread nationwide. The Santiago Metro, the state-owned rapid transit network serving the city of Santiago, has suffered huge damages. Dozens of stations have been burnt down, some of which are complete write-offs. Santiago Metro management has announced that the network could be paralysed for weeks, if not months. Buses, traffic lights, monuments and road signs, just to name a few, have been completely destroyed. But it doesn't end there. The curfew has been imposed by local authorities for 2 nights in a row now, where no citizen is allowed on the streets in several Chilean urban centres until daybreaks, where thousands of heavily armed troops patrol the streets and thousands remain stranded at Santiago International Airport, where multiple flights have been cancelled. The country's main terrestrial border crossing over from Argentina, up in the Andes, has also been shut down. Supermarkets and convenience stores are being looted as we speak. Petrol stations have been lit on fire, and there are reports of public and private property being attacked and plundered by violent gangs in various suburbs of the greater Santiago metropolitan area. To say things are tense outside is a major understatement. Regardless of the curfew, people in the hundreds of thousands challenged the government's authority and remained on the street protesting, the vast majority doing so peacefully, banging on their pots and pans on major intersections and plazas for as long as they could until the armed forces tear gassed them in the best of cases. It's easy to quickly figure out that the government has lost its leverage and is seriously struggling to control the situation. But just how did this huge fire get so out of hand? Well, it has to be said that the fuel that started this fire has been leaking for ages. The legacy of the brutal 17-year Pinochet dictatorship continues to burn into this nation's public debate to this very day. It wasn't just the state terrorism, the exiles, the murders, the fear it inflicted upon this nation and its people. Those scars, terrible as they are just a part of the story. The economic policies the Pinochet regime introduced, turning Chile into one of the most deregulated nations on earth, have spelt disaster for the vast majority of Chilean women, men and children ever since. When democratic rule was reinstated back in 1990, Chileans expected the birth of a new nation with a new democratic regulatory framework. To this very day, that collective dream has never become a reality, causing generations of frustration. Chile is exposed to an undemocratic constitution which was enforced on them virtually at gunpoint during the Pinochet years. This country's contemporary foundations were constructed during that dictatorship. Those foundations are none other than a neoliberalism on steroids economic policy, which, in a nutshell, pumps most of the nation's wealth into big business while offering the masses the myth of trickle-down economics. This country's main institutions were created by Pinochet, which transformed basic rights into lucrative private services such as the pension system and the healthcare sector. So just to name a very few. And to get a decent age pension or healthcare in Chile, the state understands you have to earn it by merit. A hard thing to do when inequality in Chile is just so flagrant. The proceeds of 45 years of this economic policy is nothing short than disastrous for the vast majority of Chileans and sheer bonanza for an elite few. Spare a thought for over 70% of Chilean families who are heavily in debt in order to make ends meet, while 50% of people earn a salary less than or equal to $560 per month. The fact that it has taken years for the masses to come out like they have across the past few days and say they've had enough is simply quite astonishing. Many would argue it has taken way too long for Chile to erupt in flames like it did over this weekend. One must be empathetic with the fact that 17 years of Pinochet left a legacy of fear and apathy. This is most probably why the leakage of fuel for a very long time percolated ever so slowly. However, the current government's pure incompetence in the past few months and weeks has caused the ceiling to come crashing down with tremendous force and speed, turning that leakage into a dangerous cascade of fuel. It's precisely in this context that every lever pulled, every button pushed by the Piñera administration turned it into a match being tossed onto the growing pool of fuel, which was unavoidably about to ignite. Piñera's second term in government has continuously placed bets on fighting fire with fire, utilising an authoritarian and divisive rhetoric, demonstrating its blatant contempt for people and their honest, non-partisan demands. And it's one of those demands exactly what took this country over the edge just a few days ago. Early this month, the Santiago metro fare, already the most expensive in Latin America, went up for a second time in less than a year. In other words, yet another layer of stress on the average family budget. The metro price hike was spontaneously challenged by high school students, immediately and in their thousands, jumping over turnstiles at stations all across the city. It didn't take long until the university students, workers and even elderly people started jumping onto the metro without paying for their ticket in protest, with social media of course playing a pivotal role in spreading the news. By mid-October, the situation had escalated very rapidly, causing delays and even cancellations all across the Santiago metro network, especially at peak hour. The Piñera administration replied by heavily militarising all metro stations, causing fury amongst the multitude who are, may I say, rightfully tired of seeing their demands over and over again replied with force and not with dialogue. By the middle of last week, stations began to be shut down and the government maintained their refusal at reviewing ticket prices. The economy minister then went on national television to defend the metro's price increase, and he suggested commuters to get on public transport earlier in order to take advantage of off-peak prices. The uproar, as you can imagine, was massive. Yet another match thrown on the by now overflowing bathtub of fuel. By Friday evening, the Santiago metro network was completely shut down after thousands of Santiaguinas and Santiaguinos kept jumping over turnstiles and peacefully manifesting their rage by now not only in relation to public transport prices but in relation to 45 years worth of pain and frustration. Millions of commuters were affected by the decision and were forced to find alternatives to obviously get home while getting tear gassed or having rubber pellets shot at them by Chile's national police force. Yet another match dropped on the fuel by the government. The situation quickly lost control, with the first buses and stations being set on fire, and even the headquarters of Santiago's Metropolitan Electricity Company suffering major damage in a separate fire. With the city engulfed in rage, the government announced that the Santiago Metro's price increase was not up for negotiation, that it would stand, and that it had signed a special and urgent decree that established a 15-day state of emergency in the national capital, allowing the armed forces to patrol the city alongside the national police force, while also allowing authorities to restrict people's freedom of movement and their right to assembly. Another match tossed on the petrol. And then this. Images of President Piñera dining at a pizzeria in Santiago's leafy eastern suburbs go viral on social media. These images later confirmed as accurate by the president's office, infuriated people who saw the president enjoying a Friday evening pizza while the city burned and leadership lacked. Since then, Piñera has announced a bill that reverses metro ticket prices to where they were in January, which was later speedily passed by the lower house in an emergency session of Parliament. Immediately after announcing the bill, Piñera said he would summon all parties to the table to discuss a public transport pricing strategy viable for all. What followed, though, was yet another match thrown on the fuel when he goes on to announce an overnight curfew in Santiago, a city of 8 million people. It's fair to assume, based on President Piñera's behaviour, that he's having trouble when it comes to gauging the sentiment of the people. He rejected for days a review of public transport prices, only backflipping on this once total chaos reigned across the nation, before immediately going on to beefing up the authoritarian and divisive rhetoric by further restricting people's freedoms by implanting overnight curfews and exacerbating the grave situation this country is suddenly in. Only a couple of hours ago, on a televised address, President Piñera controversially said, quote unquote, "We are at war."
Estamos en guerra.
Utter madness. It is blatantly evident that President Piñera, his cabinet and his right-wing coalition are unfit to govern this country. President Piñera and his cabinet have lost leverage. Far from failing to control the situation, they are making things worse every single time they address the nation. Within his coalition, moderates and conservatives are at war with one another, throwing darts at each other across the media. Moderates want the government to actually sit down and commence dialogue, while their conservative, pro-Pinochet colleagues are demanding that the government go all in with the divisive, incendiary rhetoric and political action. 8 people are dead, with the death toll expected to rise. Over 300 are injured and over 1,000 people have been detained. Nobody, absolutely nobody, knows what will happen tomorrow morning. One has the feeling the government is sailing in uncharted waters tonight, going into a major test indeed. Its first weekday after this weekend of fire here in Chile. Stay up to date with everything that's happening in Latin America and in English. Subscribe to this channel, and if you'd like to be notified every time a new video is posted, press on the bell. Thanks for watching.